Badi, the Principal Secretary of the Treasury, Dr. Chris Kipto, the World Bank Country Director, Mr. Kimiao Fan, and faculty members and all the invited guests that are present today. Now, your continuous partnership and commitment are instrumental in shaping Kenya's economic future. The University of Nairobi fraternity is proud to be part of this launch. We recognize the importance of this report, which aims to enhance the positive impacts of our national budget through the promotion of equity, poverty reduction, and inclusive growth. It aligns well with the university's philosophy and mission of providing quality university education that meets the aspirations of local and international community. Indeed, sustainable development and socioeconomic advancement are intricately weaved in the aspirations of Kenyans and the global community. Now, this report's focus on deepening financial sector reforms to address sustainable revenue collection, implementing cross-cutting measures for effective public debt management, and boosting private sector performance resonates deeply with the Kenyan people. We are particularly encouraged by its emphasis on sustaining high economic growth and productivity, which are vital for our nation's prosperity. I firmly believe that the recommendations outlined in the report will significantly help in alleviating current levels of poverty by fostering job creation and promoting equitable development. It is through such evidence-based insights that we can craft policies that truly benefit Kenyans. Now, in closing, I would like to appeal to the World Bank and our government to continue involving our researchers and academic institutions in such important studies. Their direct engagement will ensure that policies are contextualized to local realities and that Kenya's voice is amplified on the international stage. Once again, I thank you all for being part of this important event. Together, let us work towards a future where economic growth is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. Thank you, and warm welcome to the University of Nairobi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and we're really, really grateful for our partnership with the University of Nairobi. Now, please join me in welcoming the World Bank Country Director for Kenya, Somalia, Rwanda, and Uganda, Dr. Kimiao Fan.
Thank you very much, Vera. Deputy Acting Vice Chancellor, CS, PS, colleagues, distinguished panelists, faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. Jumbo. It's a real pleasure for me to be launching the World Bank's latest Kenya Economic Update, as well as the Public Finance Review here today. And thank you, University of Nairobi, for hosting us here, and thank you, CS and PS, for joining us. Since I arrived some 9 months ago here in Kenya, I have come across some, what I think, misunderstandings about the role of the World Bank Group. So, before we discuss the two reports that we're launching here today, let me perhaps take a few moments to explain what the World Bank Group does. The World Bank Group is, in essence, an international development finance institution with 189 members. So about 97% of the world's countries are members of the World Bank Group. And Kenya, of course, is a member and therefore is entitled to the financial, advisory, and knowledge services the World Bank Group offers. Kenya is represented at the board of the World Bank Group, and of course, the Kenya government and the people of Kenya are clients of the World Bank Group. Of course, the Kenyan firms, businesses, they are clients of our International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. Obviously, Kenya is a sovereign, and the government decides on its partners and sources of financing. The World Bank Group is just one of those options. That said, because the World Bank Group is essentially a large financial cooperative of countries, World Bank Group's sovereign loans are the most low-cost and long-term funding available to Kenya. The World Bank Group is indeed Kenya's largest external development financier. I think we account for about 15% of your external debt. But Kenya investors are actually Kenya government's largest creditors overall, because today more than 50% of Kenya's public sector debt coming from domestic sources. One important difference between commercial creditors and the World Bank Group, other than the low cost of our funding, is that the World Bank Group has a social mission, and that is to eliminate extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity on a livable planet. We are a development partner of the Kenyan government and the Kenyan people. Our partnership is framed by areas where government priorities and the World Bank Group's mission and our comparative advantages intersect. In Kenya, we focus strongly on priority development issues, including education, health, of course, but most importantly, growth, jobs, and governance. We are very mindful of Kenya's difficulties in generating good jobs for Kenyan youth, and this, in fact, is a core area of our support to the government of Kenya. We also work transparently. In line with our access to information policy, all our loan agreements and reports are public to enable scrutiny of our work by everyone. And we are accessible and open to dialogue. Being here today at the University of Nairobi, I think is just one example of this. We hope that we will have many more conversations with the Kenyan public, including on sensitive, difficult, and sometimes perhaps polarizing issues, such as Kenya's public finances. Let me now turn briefly to the two reports that we're launching today. We're not just a bank, we are a global development institution. And as such, we invest very heavily in knowledge for policy solutions, focusing on poverty, equity, job, and of course, climate. We regularly share our assessments with the public. Today, we launch the latest edition of the Kenya Economic Update, which we publish twice a year, as Vera mentioned. It provides an overview of recent economic developments and our assessment of the economic outlook. Our bottom line assessment is that the growth environment has become much more challenging. making it more difficult to create jobs. While significant progress has been made on inflation, the exchange rate, and international reserves, high and costly debt remain Kenya's main challenge. Hence, at this very moment, I believe fiscal policy is critical. And that is why our economic update includes a special focus on equity in fiscal policy, showing how it could be made more progressive and equitable. We assess Kenya's risk of debt distress as high. This means that there is a significant probability of Kenya defaulting on its debt. Since this is a burning issue, we launch a second report today to take a broader look at fiscal policy, expanding on the chapter in the Kenya Economic Update, and that is our public finance review. During the last 9 months that I have spent here in Kenya, as the World Bank's director, I have been somewhat surprised to learn that there are some Kenyan voices that argue for a Kenyan default. This, of course, is not a decision for the World Bank. However, I would like to offer a few words of caution. Default will not be an easy solution to Kenya's problems. We have seen, in fact, default is not an effective solution for anybody. In fact, a recent paper presenting evidence from some 221 default episodes over from 1815 to 2020 suggests that sovereign defaults on average reduce GDP per capita by some 8.5% within 3 years, and raise poverty by 6% within 5 years, and worsen other outcomes from infant mortality to life expectancy. The other option, of course, is austerity. But we also know austerity is very, very painful, as fiscal consolidation reduces aggregate demand from the economy, slowing economic and consumption growth and job creation. Our public finance review acknowledges this and offers a third way, one which can help to cut public debt to GDP ratio by 1/3 while promoting jobs and raising consumption. The key then lies in combining fiscal, governance, and structural policies. In other words, we must look beyond the budget, as the CS has often said in public. We're aware of Kenya's governance challenges, including corruption, and the Public Finance Review elevates the governance agenda to be part of the broader fiscal agenda. In addition, since there are no fiscal resources left for fiscal stimulus, we believe growth and jobs need to be created by implementing structural reforms that raise competition and competitiveness of the economy. The presentation on the Public Finance Review that will follow shortly will explain how we think that fiscal, governance, and structural measures can square the circle of debt sustainability, equity, productivity, and jobs. I look forward to a very productive discussion today. Thank you, and let me now invite the Honorable C.S. Mbadi to deliver his keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chimao, Fund the World Bank Division Director for Kenya, Rwanda, Somalia, and Uganda. Let me also recognize Dr. Chris Kipto, who is the Principal Secretary in my ministry and also heading the State Department for National Treasury. You are now acting both as the VC and you're also the DVC and the acting DVC, Professor Mahalu Jackson. Mary Potter, I recognize you. She's the director of IFC in Kenya, which is the supporting the private wing and private businesses. My brother Salim, the IMF resident representative, senior World Bank staff present, development partners, other development partners present, students of the great University of Nairobi. Even with the challenges, I still believe the University of Nairobi is still the greatest university in this region. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'm delighted to be here this morning for the launch of this 31st edition of the Kenya Economic Update and Public Finance Review Reports. But I'm also excited to be here. And let me not forget, although I'm not seeing Julius Kipngetich here. Yeah, we were with him on the other side, and I'm trying to check where he is. He's hidden somewhere there. I am also delighted to be here again because this is an institution that I've been associated with very closely. First as a student for some time, and then I also worked here. This was my first employment. And of course, I worked under Julius at one point, and also I was his student. So I owe him a lot. I was here as a staff for close to 8 years. So actually, apart from working in Parliament, I think this is where I've worked the longest. I've also worked in Parliament for 17 years. At the Treasury, I've just barely worked for some months. So I am more associated with the University of Nairobi than I would be associated with the National Treasury. First, let me thank Mr. Chimao Fan, who is the World Bank Division Director for Kenya, as I mentioned, Rwanda, Somalia, and Uganda, for inviting me as a guest of honor to this launch. Secondly, I wish to thank the World Bank Country Office team for effectively coordinating the preparation and finalization of these reports. As I begin my remarks, let me acknowledge the strong and mutually beneficial partnership that Kenya has had with most of our development partners, particularly with the multilateral organizations such as the World Bank and, of course, the IMF. It is through this partnership that the government has continued to implement many development programs and deliver services to Kenyans. As a matter of fact, if we didn't have this partnership that we've had with the multilateral partners, I don't think we would have come out of the shocks of the COVID-19. So we owe it, as a matter of gratitude, to the relationship that we've had with our development partners. The World Bank's support remains central to Kenya's development financing strategy, especially under the Kenya World Bank Country Partnership Framework that is aligned to the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda. The World Bank's portfolio, as of May 2025, has 25 national and 7 regional projects whose total net commitment is $6.4 billion, which is equivalent to 826 billion shillings. And this portfolio is in addition to the $6.2 billion disbursed under the 7 development policy operations that Kenya has completed, which we call DPO. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure we all agree on the significance of the reports we are launching today. For instance, a special focus by the Kenya Economic Update on poverty and distributional impact of fiscal policy in Kenya is timely. As you're all aware, most countries are emerging from the adverse effects of multiple shocks, most notably COVID-19. But I will add the regional conflicts. We've had a prolonged war between Russia and Ukraine, and we also have now war in the Middle East. And still, also other shocks are coming up, including the change in tariffs and policies which have been implemented by the new US government. So this is a time for countries to build buffers that would help them ride over shocks as they emerge. In the very recent times, world economies, and as I mentioned, are experiencing heightened uncertainty due to recent tariff hikes by the US government and reciprocal actions by other countries such as China, which has led to marked revisions downwards in global growth projections across most economies. We are aware that IMF just released in April the World Economic or Global Economic Outlook, which has downgraded or rather revised downwards almost all economic growth in almost all economies, Kenya included. So the Kenyan economy has continued to strengthen. Economic growth has remained resilient in the face of a challenging global environment and multi-season droughts, with GDP growth rates for 2023 at 5.7% and a slower GDP growth rate in 2024 of 4.7%. Sound economic policies and the governance of the country have aided in steering the country to the evident quick recovery from the pandemic, and such resilience largely reflects the benefits from economic diversification. What has saved Kenya is our diversified economy. We have a highly diverse non-commodity economy with value-add manufacturing and resilient services sector. The economy is, however, projected to improve and expand by 5.3% in 2025 and 2026, which will be driven by enhanced agricultural productivity, a resilient services sector, and the ongoing implementation of policy measures in the priority sectors of the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Kenya has been able to achieve macroeconomic stability. I will just point out a few. Inflation rate has actually declined to 4.1% in April 2025 from a peak of 9.6% in October 2022. The Kenya shilling exchange rate has now stabilized against major international currencies, and interest rates have gradually come down in line with the easing of the monetary policy. The current account deficit improved to 3.1% of GDP in the year leading to February 2025 from 3.3% of GDP in a similar period in 2024, reflecting improved exports of goods and services and resilient diaspora remittance inflows and lower oil imports, which have impacted on our current account deficit or balances. Official exchange rate reserves as at the end of February 2025 was at 9.682 billion US dollars. That is equivalent to 4.4 months of import cover, as I mentioned, by the end of February. This is providing adequate buffers and gives market confidence. Now, on fiscal policy, our fiscal policy seeks lower fiscal deficit and support debt sustainability through a fiscal consolidation plan. So our target is to lower the fiscal deficit, and actually there has been work along that line. 2020-2021, the fiscal deficit was at 8.3% of the GDP. The following year it came down, that is 2021-22, it came down to 6.2%. Then it came down 2022-23 to 5.6%. 23-24, it again came down to 5.3%. 24-25, our target is to be below the last year's fiscal deficit of 5.3%. Although we have had challenges, and we are all aware that last year we had a major internal shock. For 3 months, our economy was literally shut. And I think Apart from the post-election violence of 2007, this is the longest time that our economy was literally shut due to unrest. And so that really had a toll and hit our economy so badly. But we are coming out of it. The indicators are clear, and signs are, in my view, very good. Now, to help, because our biggest challenge as an economy is the debt servicing, is the high debt levels, is the fiscal deficit or fiscal sustainability. And this we can only come out of through fiscal consolidation plan. We must have a fiscal consolidation plan. I will report here that I think this year, while preparing the 2025-2026 budget estimates, we were bold as a government, took a decision to be radical in terms of projecting our fiscal deficit and in terms of projecting our revenue, which we feel as National Treasury that over the years has been exaggerated. So I want to report here, Director, that we reduced our projected expenditure below what was in the budget policy statement. Actually, we had to cut our budget by about 120 billion. So now our projected expenditure for 2025-26 has come down to 4,239 billion. This will be financed by a lower ordinary revenue projection, much lower than what was in the budget review outlook paper of last year, which last year it was 3,018 billion. We have revised that downwards to 2,757 billion. Very radical. And then we are projecting to collect from non-tax revenue about 560 billion, 559.9 billion to be exact. And then we are also expecting to get grants of 46 billion. That would then leave you with a budget deficit of 877 billion shillings, which we plan to get 284 billion externally in terms of external financing and 592 billion from the domestic market. That is the plan. And I think if we live within that plan, then I'm sure that we will be able to continuously slow down the growth in budget in our stock of public debts. So the plan is to slow down the annual growth in public debt and implement an effective liability management strategy without compromising service delivery to citizens. May I report that that is one of the reasons why early this year we decided to deal with the liability that is falling due in 2027 as early as 2025. Why we did that was because last year, you'll recall, that up to February of 2024, we were not so clear on how we were going to deal with the maturing Eurobond, which was maturing in June. And that was a $2 billion bond. And that caused a lot of instability and which made the shilling to depreciate almost 160 to the dollar. We didn't want to fall to such irresponsibility again, and that is why we took the bold and pragmatic and proactive step to do liability management for 2027 Eurobond. So we are only remaining with 2028 bond to deal with. And so I think we will be smoothing the curve. So fiscal consolidation will be supported by continued efforts to enhance domestic revenue mobilization. We will be reprioritizing and rationalizing expenditures while safeguarding priority government programs and social spending. And I think that the director spoke to. As we apply austerity measures, we must also be alive to the fact that there are certain social services that must be provided, e.g. education. We cannot fail to provide education to our children, and so we must make resources available by reprioritizing that particular sector. And in this budget, we are providing 54 billion for capitation going to day secondary schools. We are providing 30.9 billion going to junior secondary school, and then we are also providing 7.9 billion to the capitation of primary schools. That is besides the 5.2 billion that we are providing for the TVET, for the support or capitation of TVET, and we are also providing 41 billion for Higher Education Loans Board, and providing another 16.9 to university funding through it's like a bursary support to the students. And finally, I would also mention that we are providing about 86 billion to support our universities. I know it is not sufficient, but it's because of the limitation of resources. I would then, therefore, because we are in a university institution, challenge our universities to be more innovative. I remember when we came up, and Professor Julius Kimetich will confirm this, when we came up with the parallel degree program, it was supposed to be a transitional program to help universities transition to a more sustainable methods of funding our education, our universities. So as finances come from the universities, there are two areas that I challenge universities to focus on, where you have advantage. One is research, and two, consultancy. Universities worldwide are known to be research institutions. Take advantage of that and have competitive advantage in terms of providing research. I don't see why government institutions should consult, or rather contract other bodies out there to do research for them. It should be the universities. We should be doing the research, and we pay the universities for the services offered. You should offer consultancy to government departments. You have the capacity, you have the human resource. So I dare challenge you to focus on that area. If you need support, budgetary support from the national government, I think the government would be willing to support research at the universities, and how the universities can come up with consultancies to help boost your income and also to help our country. Let me move forward because of time. So on the revenue side, government is focusing more on increasing the tax base and making the system more progressive. The focus is to efficiently collect revenue and seek leakages. There are a lot of revenue leakages in this country, and this must be dealt with. We must seal revenue leakages. And this can only be achieved through automation and the digitization at Kenya Revenue Authority, which we are undertaking. Ladies and gentlemen, the government in 2024 committed not to introduce new taxes following the protests on the 2024 finance bill that were witnessed in the country last year. In keeping with this commitment, the finance bill of 2025 that was submitted to Parliament in April 2025 has not introduced any new taxes. The bill targets to enhance tax revenue collection through a combination of administrative reforms at KRA and improve taxpayer compliance by simplifying tax laws to make them easier for taxpayers to understand. So we are not introducing any new taxes. And I think that is a disappointment to people who really were waiting to use us to fight, to kuanguka na bili yangu. Unfortunately, that is not available for them. They can use another route, but on that one of high taxes, it is missing. The bill also targets to reduce tax expenditures in line with the national tax policy and medium-term revenue strategy by streamlining tax incentives in the various tax laws. I know many people know that when it comes to this, I speak so passionately. I am so bold to say that we are subsidizing things that we should not subsidize in this country. Yet, I know very well that we have not introduced, we still have certain items which are considered basic and zero rated. E.g., bread. We have not removed it from zero rating, but I think our continued subsidy of bread is irresponsible. It is irresponsible because assessment that we carry out in the country is that bread is not even a commodity of the poor in this country. And the other thing is, even if it is the commodity of the poor, how do you distinguish or how do you separate bread that the poor eat from the bread that the cabinet secretary for finance or national treasury eats? We buy, we shop, and yet we subsidize all our bread, including my bread, including that goes to State House, is subsidized by the poor person who pays taxes. One thing that people have not appreciated is when we subsidize some of these things, it is not a subsidy because there is no money stuck somewhere that we draw from and subsidize. That money comes from the poor Kenyan. That Kenyan who is earning 50,000 shillings and has to surrender about 30% of it to the government as taxes. So let us think and review some of these subsidies. I think we are just used to some of these subsidies. Some were ridiculous. You find the government of Kenya subsidizing, putting at zero-rated commodity, cement, steel used for affordable housing. How do you control and manage if I go to buy cement for affordable housing in Ngara? How do you manage or how do you monitor that cement that I bought would not end up in Karen to put up a commercial building? So some of these subsidies, they don't even help the consumers. Actually, as a matter of fact, that bread example that I gave, I will tell you for a fact that those who are baking bread today to sell to us employ more accountants than bakers because they don't need to bake bread. They just need smart accountants to cook books for them and get refund from Kenya Revenue Authority. And that is your money, by the way. That money that those unscrupulous business people take from Kenya Revenue Authority. There is no money that belongs to Kenya Revenue Authority. It belongs to the people of Kenya. Let us have a conversation going forward on these subsidies in terms of tax expenditure. So the objective is to gradually align Kenya's tax system with international best practices. The bill further introduces targeted incentives to support priority areas such as the tea and coffee sectors to attract foreign direct investment through the Nairobi International Financial Center. Ladies and gentlemen, on the spending side, because we can't just talk about revenue without talking about spending, this government is keen on the application of good governance principles and in line with Kenya's expectations has prioritized transparency and accountability in public spending. And in this regard, in order to strengthen expenditure control and improve effectiveness in public spending, the government will do the following. 1, continue to rationalize and reduce non-essential expenditure. 2, implement an end-to-end e-procurement system that I launched in April 2025, to be exact on April 7th, to maximize value for money and increase transparency in procurement. Beginning July 1st, 2025, procurement by all MDAs will be through the e-procurement system. And any procurement outside the e-procurement system will not be paid. All the over 3,000 MDAs are now being onboarded. And that this exercise is led and chaired by none other than my principal secretary in charge of National Treasury at that high level. We want to reduce human interaction with procurement processes. This story where you have to carry cartons or papers to submit tender documents will end. Even if you are in the US or you are wherever, you can still tender. You can still send your tender document online. And people will be seeing. If you are losing a tender, you can just see. Evaluation will also be done online. And this idea where someone can even pluck a page out of your documents when you are about to win a tender must end. Even paginating the document, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you forget and you paginate 1, 2, 3, 8, and you jump to 10, and you leave 9, that alone can disqualify your tender document. That should be a thing of the past. And experience from other jurisdictions demonstrate clearly that in the first year of implementation of e-procurement, you save between 10 and 15% of the budgets for procurable goods and services. And that in Kenya could be well more than 150 billion shillings. That can go towards supporting education, health, and other critical social services. So we want to also revamp the public service pension administration through digitization and reengineering of the pension management system. In order to strengthen public finance management, the government is entrenching the following: the zero-based budgeting to reorient the budgeting and expenditure framework of the government. And two, we are also fast-tracking migration from cash basis to accrual basis of accounting. I will not elaborate on that. Accountants in the room, you understand what I mean. We will also be implementing, or we are implementing, the Treasury single account to improve cash management, and we are also using public-private partnership framework for commercially viable projects. We are revamping that department. We have a new director because we know that is the future in terms of providing infrastructural projects. So as I conclude, I wish to underscore that at the heart of our bottom-up economic transformation agenda is the commitment to strengthen economic activity with a special focus on bringing down the cost of living, eradicating hunger, creating jobs, expanding the tax base, improving foreign exchange balances, and fostering inclusive growth. That is our focus. That is the trajectory that we are taking. So in the pursuit of this, we remain open to working with all stakeholders and development partners, including multilateral and bilateral institutions, and the private sector also, to support economic growth for job creation and improved livelihoods of Kenyans. So ladies and gentlemen, with this, I had written few remarks, but now I am changing that to many remarks. It is now my privilege to officially launch the 31st edition of the Kenya Economic Update and Public Finance Review Reports. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Thank you very much, CS Mbadi, for those insightful remarks. A couple of takeaways for me is that the government is definitely committed to a radical and bold approach to address the fiscal deficit and also progress fiscal consolidation. You also noted your commitment to address leakages, and that is definitely very welcome, not just by the bank, but I think Kenyans will definitely appreciate that. Another key takeaway for me is the fact that you're not going to be introducing new taxes. And for those whose pay slips have been shrinking, this is definitely welcome news. You also highlighted the fact that you are definitely going to focus your attention towards addressing subsidy. I've always wondered why bread is zero rated. So thank you very much for clarifying that. Now, to everybody else, please join me in thanking all the speakers, including the CS and all those who spoke before him. Our hashtag for today, just as a reminder, is the Kenya Economic Update, as well as hashtag Kenya Public Finance Review. And I'm told by my social media team there that we've beaten all the scandals in Kenya today, and we are trending at number 2. So please keep those tweets coming. That's not an easy feat in Kenya. There's always something going on that trends. The young people here know what I'm on about. Now, would like to pivot the conversation a little bit. I would like to invite my colleagues who are the authors of the Kenya Economic Update, as well as the Public Finance Review. To join me on stage, first and foremost, is one of our key authors of the Kenya Economic Update and our senior economist at the World Bank, Ms. Naomi Madenge.
I'm mentally deciding if to stand here or to stand at that end because I need to see the screen. So before I do that, allow me to appreciate the session that we've had in the morning. First, to recognize our honorable CS, our chief guest, John Bundy, our PS, Chris Kipto, our CD, IFC Director, Professor Jackson Malu, Acting Vice Chancellor from the university, our distinguished panelists, and all our invited guests, good morning. With that, let me move to the side, and I ask the IT to kindly display the slides. So just to start us off, the Kenya Economic Update is a semi-annual report that we do every year. So the update that we are giving today follows from our update in November 2024. And so we'll be looking at what has happened between then and now. And that's why we are in the 31st edition. The next edition, number 32, will be in December, and we invite you all to attend that one too. Next slide. I don't see the clicker. So this is the overview of the presentation. We'll look at the recent economic developments, and then we'll look at the outlook and risks. And I want to highlight here that some of the things that I will be presenting here have been alluded to by the CS and also by the country director. But what we'll be looking at is to see the numbers, because it's important for us to put it into context and to see the trend. If we start with so I'm going to first give the key messages, so that if anybody decides to leave, you will leave with some key messages, but I urge you not to leave because we have the next very interesting presentation on the public finance review. So key message number one, looking at 2024, is that the economy has slowed compared to 2023. And this is in the face of an improved macroeconomic environment. If you look at all the economic indicators that the CS was mentioning, those have improved since 2024. Key message number two is that Kenya's fiscal policy challenges are multifaceted, and these have significant implications for Kenya's economic stability and growth. Key message number three is that we've seen borrowing and with high lending rates, and the risk is with this is that it risks crowding out the private sector. Number four, in terms of our projection, is that real GDP is expected to pick up in the medium term. And our concluding key message is that CS has alluded to the constrained fiscal space, and with the rising demand for investments in essential services, including education, health, and social protection, and the limited inclusivity of economic growth, there is need for more efficient and inclusive fiscal policy, and that is what the second report will be looking at. So in terms of growth, the graph on our left shows the outcome, the contribution to growth for all the sectors. And if you look at the last graph, which is the 2024 compared with 2023, you can see the slight decline. So the gray bar, that's the services, which has been a very resilient sector in the economy, contributing much of the growth. But if you compare with 2023, we see that there's a slowdown. The blue bars, that's industry, the dark blue. And you can see, compared to the previous years, that the 2024 has really shrunk. What has shrunk most under the industry subsector is construction. But we notice that manufacturing slightly picked up. But still, agriculture remains resilient, but still that still suffered a bit of a slowdown compared to the dark blue bar in 2023 and 2024. So our economy is still resilient, but we saw growth slowing down in 2024. The other chart looks at domestic demand, and the dark blue bar is domestic demand, which has moderated in the face of high real interest rates. So we look at the macroeconomic indicators that we've been speaking about. The first one is the exchange rate, and you can see that the shilling has been stable since February 2024, when we issued the Eurobond, and there was no more panic on the foreign exchange market. If you look at the reserves, they have been above the statutory 4 months of import cover since September 2024. And the red line represents the threshold, and you can see the blue bars, which represents the reserves in amounts, and the line is the months of import cover. Those are above the statutory requirement of the 4 months of import cover. The other indicator that we've looked at is inflation. And you can see the red dotted line is the midpoint. So since about April 2024, the early part of 2024, inflation has been below the CBK's midpoint target range. That means it has been below the 5%. And even though it has been slightly picking up, it still remains below the CBK's target range. So in general, these are the indicators that we are looking at to show that the macroeconomic environment has been stable. But on the monetary side, we look at the lending rates, we look at the policy rate, and what we are seeing is that the domestic borrowing, which as we will see in the next slide, was higher than what had been targeted, and coupled with the high lending rates, the risk is that it risks crowding out the private sector. So if you look at the red line, that's the nominal policy rate, that's the CBR, and CBK has been implementing the accommodative monetary policy. So the rate has declined from a high of 13, and we are now at 10%. But if you look at the dark line, that's the nominal lending rate. So we see the contrast that despite the decline in the CBR, the lending rates still remain high. And the other two blue lines represent credit to the private sector. So you can see since about December 2023, growth in credit to the private sector has been slowing down. And our data goes up to 2024. So we see that the fact that the lower CBR is not translating to lower lending rates. Again, we also look at the non-performing loans, which have been rising. And the most smaller banks are the ones that have been mostly affected by the non-performing loans. And that is the dark blue line at the top. You can see that since about May 2023, the non-performing loans have been rising, mostly for the small banks, but the trend again applies across all the banks, the middle banks, and the big banks. The dark gray line, together with the blue lines, is the total. So you can see what is pushing up the trend is the non-performing loans coming from the smaller banks. If this is not addressed, this could weaken the bank's capacity to lend, and could also weaken investor confidence, posing longer-term risks in the financial sector. As I had alluded to earlier, domestic borrowing rose in the year above target due to lower than expected external financing. So what we show here in the table is the target in terms of external disbursements, that's 686.7 billion Kenya shillings. But what was achieved, the actual outturn was 358. If you look at the domestic borrowing, the target was lower at 450 billion shillings. The outcome was 616 billion Kenya shillings, mainly sourced from government securities. So the outcome of a lower external, the lower expected external financing then necessitated the government to pick more domestic financing. However, domestic yields have declined in line with the declining policy rate. And if you compare, the red line so the blue line is 2023, the red line is as at March 2025. So you can see our yields are declining, which follows through from the lower CBR. As we've always said, fiscal consolidation has consistently been under strain, and CS alluded to some of the pressures that we have been experiencing, including the shocks, the COVID-19. We know 2020 to 2021, we had the persistent drought. We had the protest last year. So we look at the outcome in revenues in Q3 of the current financial year. And what you can see here is that across all income tax heads, the outcome was below the target, mostly for the income tax. The one that had a positive outcome above the target was the appropriation in aid. And we note the challenges of sourcing revenues domestically, given what we've seen in the past, but the bigger question is to look at why we are collecting less than we have been targeting. But what CS mentioned is that going forward, the revenue targets are now more realistic. We've always mentioned that the revenue projections have been unrealistic, hence widening the gap between the actual and the outcome. So we expect to see better outcomes in the next year with realistic projections in terms of revenue and realistic expenditure projections. However, if you look at the right side, these are expenditures. And the numbers are a bit small, but what we had highlighted in red is the interest payments. You can see that in 2020, 2021, we were paying about 4.4% of our GDP for interest.
coming to 2024, 2025, we are now at 5.7%. And again, this is something that we have been following closely, but we take note of what government has said, that we are looking into going into lower, reducing the growth in the public debt. And going forward, we expect to see interest payments declining as we move more towards lower cost debt. So what we are noting is that despite expenditure reductions, the revenue shortfalls due to the sluggish economic activity have led to a higher than expected deficit. And again, and this risks continued build-up of pending bills, which is something that we have been speaking about for quite a while. But we also would like to acknowledge the government's initiative of wanting to clear the pending bills. The verification committee has been put in place, and they have verified a significant portion of those pending bills, with government putting in place a strategy to clear that. CS also alluded to the tax policy measures and administrative measures that they are planning to implement in the next FY. But we note that the full impact of this tax policy and administration reforms will depend on effective implementation, besides saying this is what are the intentions. And again, this will also be boosted by economic recovery. If you look at putting together the revenue underperformance and the expenditure pressures, we know that this has consistently constrained the fiscal space. And just to put it into perspective, if you look at the total committed expenditures, and here we are talking about expenditures on wages and salaries, interest payments, pensions, transfers, parliamentary and judicial services, in last fiscal year, this took up about 87% of the tax revenues and 73% of the total tax revenues. Looking into the current FY, this slightly goes up to 88% and of total tax revenues and 73% of total revenues. And the question now remains is then what remains for development expenditures? As had been alluded to earlier, our public debt remains at high risk of debt distress. Now, in the face of this narrowing fiscal space and the demand for investments in essential services, including health and education, and the limited inclusivity of economic growth, then there is need for a more efficient and effective fiscal policy. And you'll see these are the options that have been provided in the public finance review. In terms of our growth projection, we are cautiously optimistic, and we note that we expect growth at 4.5% in 2025, and this will pick up in the medium term to 4.9 and 5% in 2027. We urge you to follow us through on December to see if there's any revisions in the next edition. What are the assumptions we are making? We are considering that we will have continued weather conditions. We will still maintain a stable macroeconomic environment that will still boost this resilient growth. We'll still continue to see an accommodative monetary policy and an improved productivity in the key value chains, following through from the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda and the value chains that the government has been working on. So we expect to see this contributing to a resilient economy despite the lower growth numbers. The risks that we have factored in are the global economic and policy uncertainty. And again, we also take note of domestic social and political risks, fiscal slippage, as we have seen in previous years, where the deficit, the outturn in the deficit is always higher than what is originally budgeted. And we also take into consideration the weather-related shocks. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is just an overview of the recent economic developments, and we urge you to read through the report, which has more than we had time to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for that presentation. It gives me great pleasure now to invite my colleague and economist at the World Bank, Mr. Jorge Tudela. He is one of the key authors of the Public Finance Review and will walk us through that shortly. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Let me first start by recognize CS Embody, PS Quito, acting Vice Chancellor of the university, professors, students, and ladies and gentlemen. Again, we are extremely happy to be here. Personally, being at the university presenting, it feels like home. As the CS also, I started my career a while back already as a teaching assistant, as a research assistant in a university in my home country of Peru. Let us start with the presentation. Apologies. So, as we have been mentioning, this public finance review is called Beyond the Budget. It's a fiscal policy for growth and jobs. And with the presentation, the aim is not to go through every single detail of the public finance review, but the aim is to present and put some numbers to the, let's say, many of options that our director just alluded to. So, as Naomi mentioned, Kenya right now is currently facing several challenges. And for us, it's at a crossroads and can select again from many different options. We're going to present 3 of them today. The first one that we call business as usual. And business as usual for us is, let's say, what has happened in the last 3 to 4 years. All right? First, the fiscal slippages that Naomi has mentioned, and fiscal slippages again meaning when the budgeted fiscal numbers are not the same as the actual ones by the end of the fiscal year, already are intensifying these high levels of the high level of risk of debt distress. Second one, we're also seeing a slowing economy. We saw KMBS numbers a few days back, growth at 4.7% for 2024 compared to the 5.7% on the previous years. High cost of living, inflation has come down, but that doesn't mean that the cost of living has come down. And also declining wages. And here let me explain the second graph that we have over there. These are real wages, total, the blue, the red line, sorry, private sector, the blue line, and the public sector, the orange line. And what we can see is that these challenges have not started recently. Real wages have been declining consistently, at least since 2019. And before that, in the economic boom of the 2010s, at least since 2012, wages have been relatively stagnant. And another characteristic of this business as usual scenario is the insufficient progressivity of the fiscal system. And let us say it, the fiscal system right now is progressive. We have done the analysis, and what we see here, perhaps I'm not going to go into the details, is, let's say, the distribution of benefits and, let's say, payments that each decile of the income distribution, let's say the poorest households and the richest households, do to the fiscal system. And in the end, we see this negative slope. That negative slope means that the poorest households receive more from the fiscal system than they give to the fiscal system overall. But in general, we believe it's insufficient. And this is compounded with weak governance controls and weak control of corruption systems overall. And just to reveal a bit some of the magnitude of the fiscal challenge that Kenya is going through, and the CS also alluded to this, what we have here is on the horizontal axis, let me start explaining the graph. The horizontal axis is government gross debt, all right? On the vertical axis, which is the y-axis, we have interest payments as a share of the total revenues that the government collects. Blue dots are countries of the world, all right? And that red steep line is Kenya over the years. And at least since 2014, Kenya's interest payments of revenues have tripled. In 10 years, Kenya's interest to revenue payments have tripled. And right now, they absorb around 1/3 of revenues. And this growth, as you can see, because that blue-ish line is, let's say, the average country in the world, Kenya's increase has been much faster than other countries in the world. So we believe that if Kenya continues through this fiscal pathway, let's say, and this business as usual scenario of low growth, falling real wages, fiscal slippages, it risks that debt becomes unsustainable. And we're very glad that our director said here the numbers. There is ample evidence, and many of you, I'm sure, are economic students here. There's ample evidence that countries that default experience severe losses in economic welfare, in social welfare, and in general, it weakens the social contracts of countries. It has worsening outcomes on other measures, infant mortality, educational achievement, other health measures, etc. So just to start saying this, fiscal consolidation is critical for Kenya to avoid this path. Option number 2, pure fiscal austerity. So a strong fiscal adjustment alone, no? With basically reducing the budget deficit to reach the debt level commitment by 2029 of 55% of GDP, let's say in net present values. This is an option that, of course, is desirable from the fiscal angle, but it has uncertain outcomes in other types of indicators for the Kenyan economy. It could also reduce welfare, right? It could also reduce consumption and wages, because fiscal policy here has not the objective to support those challenges, only that. Secondly, it does not solve Kenya's underlying structural issues. And in the report, you will see that from the analysis we made, Kenya's fiscal challenges are a direct consequence of the changing economic structure in the Kenyan economy for at least the last 10 to 15 years. All right? Economic, fiscal, and governance inefficiencies have arisen in the last 10 to 15 years. So if we just go through this path of pure fiscal austerity, those structural issues wouldn't be addressed. And it also appears to be socially unsustainable. It again weakens Kenya's social contract. So fiscal policy for us should look, again, beyond pure austerity, beyond the budget, because there are other challenges that also need to be addressed. We know that productivity growth is stagnant. And we know, again, many economists say that productivity is, in the long term, is everything for economic growth, right? And many of these, many of the numbers that we see in the productivity slowdown come also from distortions induced by fiscal policy itself. In the last, let's say, 10 years or so, from the early 2000s to the end of the 2010s decade, total factor productivity in Kenya grew close to zero. All right? And this has special consequences not only to economic growth, but to good job creation. Second one, inequality in Kenya remains high. And the falling trends that we saw in the mid-2000s have remained relatively stagnant over time. And this is something that fiscal policy should also address. And number 3, weak governance control, weak corruption controls also hurt fiscal policy. As of now, Kenya stands on the bottom 3rd in the world ranking of perceptions of corruption by Transparency International. So fiscal policy should also aim to remove distortions to promote jobs. Governance should be strengthened to provide better service delivery, health, education, etc. The budget should become more equitable, and of course, anti-corruption control systems should be strengthened. And all of this is also part of fiscal policy. So there is another way. There is another way from business as usual, and there is another way from pure fiscal austerity. So in this report, we try to, yes, address the challenges and give recommendations to tackle the challenges of fiscal and debt sustainability. So fiscal policy stabilizes output, builds buffers, and strengthens macroeconomic stability. But we also look at equity, at progressivity, and at jobs. Fiscal policy should also aim to reduce poverty and income inequality, to enhance human capital, health, education, and to promote social and political cohesion. And finally, very important, is promote the efficient allocation of factors of production, let's say. No? That this will in turn increase fiscal savings and promote jobs and promote productivity. Behind this, in all of this, let's say this triangle, what we're doing is to try to analyze first each fiscal instrument that we recommend, again, not only from the angle of how it improves fiscal and debt sustainability, but also in turn how it does improve the equity and productivity challenges that Kenya is experiencing. As a pillar, transversal pillar through all of the fiscal instruments we are recommending, governance and anti-corruption reform are key. And this should be transversal throughout the fiscal policy design. Without going too much on the details, no, we recommend a series of revenue and expenditure policies, and you will see them in the report. And here, let just me present the, let's say, the premises or the principles that we have found through our research that will help to design fiscal policy in lines of what I have just said. In terms of revenue policy implementation, first conclusion that we found in the research is there is space to increase the revenue base in Kenya. There is space to collect more taxes because Kenya is a relatively richer country than many other countries, for example, in the region. So there is space, and Kenya, as of now, is collecting less than, let's say, it should collect. Second, that economic growth alone is not enough to increase this tax collection. Economic growth by itself is generating limited tax revenues. And you know, we do this by looking how economic growth moves with tax revenues. And in the end, they are not very, let's say, associated. They don't move together so much. Third, that raising taxes, now we're just speaking about the level of the taxes, it's not going to yield more revenues overall. All right, let me say that again. Raising taxes might not yield more revenues overall. And you know, let me explain this graph here on my left. What we have on the horizontal axis is the export share with GDP. So let's say this is an approximation to the degree of how competitive the Kenyan economy is overall. On the vertical axis, we have corporate income taxes share in GDP. From the MTRS, we learned that in general, the biggest reason for the decline in tax revenues in the last 10 years is income taxes. So CIT, corporate income taxes, is a part of income taxes. The other one, let's say, is PIT, personal income taxes. And what we have seen is that the decline of Kenya's competitiveness overall in the last 10 years is very, very much associated with the fall on the CIT share, with the fall of corporate income taxes. If we, let's say, drew the same graph, not with exports, but with the manufacturing sector, also we see this declining trend. They are not just very associated, but they move together. They have been falling together. So that points to something I was saying before. The changing economic structure of Kenyan economy is one of the principal reasons why we see these falling revenues and underlying Kenya's fiscal performance overall. So even if more taxes are raised, even if alone economic growth is pursued, this might also not yield the expected outcomes. So this comes to the conclusion that there are two needs, immediate needs. First one, there's a need to increase the tax base. And second, revise, as the CS said, the numerous exemptions that are given, not only in VAT, but also in CIT, also on PIT. So our revenue chapter in the report focuses on 6 items specifically. The first one, tax incentives need to be more efficient. They need to yield more outcomes, so we don't see what is happening there as declining shares of competitiveness in the economy. Second, promote progressivity, because if progressivity is not promoted, formalization is damaged, all right? Especially at the bottom end, for example, of the personal income taxes band. Third, simplifying the tax systems for SMEs. Fourth, we have seen that there is plenty of potential in capturing revenues from real estate, property taxes, ground rents. There's also a lot of potential there. Of course, using taxes more efficiently to disincentivize some types of harmful behaviors to society. We know these health taxes on alcohol, tobacco, and also on climate. And underpinning all of these reforms, strengthening tax administration, strengthening the efficiency, of course, of tax compliance. Just to say before going to expenditure, if in the hypothetical scenario that all the policies that we recommend, and you will see there the numbers per policy, if all were implemented, this could yield around 4% of GDP. On expenditures, the CS and the director have alluded to this. Also, Naomi, the budget is already quite rigid. No? This means that there is limited space for further cuts. No? There are statutory expenditures that already commit the budget. Interest payments, transfers to counties, wages, they come down slowly. So there is little space for further cuts. And if these cuts are undertaken, they, of course, damage the delivery of public services. Number two, Naomi alluded to this. Pending bills are still high. The stock of pending bills and arrears, and this is borrowing to the private sector, is around 4.3% of GDP. So this slows down fiscal consolidation. So looking at this, it is key to increase the efficiency of the budget, of how money is spent. Of every shilling that is spent should yield more. So that means doing more with less, or doing at least more with the same. Our policy focus here on expenditures is looking at these efficiency gains in the public sector wage bill and HR management, in public financial management, PIM, PPPs, cash transfers, no? Transfers that the national government does to SOEs, and there's importance in revising those, but also to analyze the distortions that some of these SOEs cause in competitive markets. And of course, we have sectoral focuses to improve service delivery on health, on education, on water, on agriculture, etc. However, these policies could yield up to 1.7% of GDP. But the analysis will show, and you will read it in the report again, that additional spending is needed for social sectors to improve the quality and also the quantity in many unserved regions of social sectors like health and education. It's needed around 4% of additional GDP in spending. So there's also a need for more funding. It's not just about the savings. So again, for us, there is another way. But somehow, sometimes, policies seem quite disconnected from what is happening in the ground, what is happening, for in this case, in Kenya. So what we have done is we want to maximize the impact of each of the policies that is being applied. Not just the direct impact, again, on savings, on revenues, but also indirect impacts on equity, impacts on jobs, impacts on productivity, and impacts on growth. And let's call them, those are indirect impacts. So what we have done is try to package these policies together and package them in themes that we know that are key challenges that Kenya should address. Governance. We have a package on governance, on addressing the competitiveness issues, on SOEs, on increasing transfers to the poor, in social protection, and of course on trying to leverage, again, fiscal policy to address the high cost of living, especially in Nairobi. Not going to go through all of the packages, but let's just give one example of the analysis we tried to do. So what we have here is what we call policy package number 1, the policy package on governance. We call it from rents to public services. And we believe that if implementing governance measures, anti-corruption reforms, many of them which are explained, for example, in chapter number 3, and additional revenue measures, it could yield direct and indirect impacts on all of these variables I have addressed. For example, in policy package number 1, we package the procurement reform, as it was mentioned, to reduce leakages in public sector expenditure, strengthen investment frameworks, financial management frameworks, the PPPs, the PIM, the Treasury single account that was mentioned. All of those will strengthen public financial management. Increasing accountability for the police. That's also part of anti-corruption reform. Stronger conflict of interest frameworks. For example, defining conflict of interest in the law as it is in international best practices. All of the implementation of these reforms could yield, initially, in the next 10 years, decreasing public debt for around 10%, 11% percentage points of GDP relative to the baseline. This is modeling that we have done. And of course, we are at the university. The channels can be clearer here when investors look to invest in a country or in a particular sector. They also assess governance. They also assess regulation. They also assess corruption. And investors sometimes pay a premium if a country has weak governance systems. So what we try to do is calculate that. We try to calculate what is the premium that someone who wants to invest in Kenya pays in additional cost of borrowing. And if that is reduced, let's say, to a level similar to an upper middle income country, which is, let's say, the objective, these are the effects. And of course, there are positive effects also on jobs, on wages, positive effects on productivity, and all through these channels of increased private investment by reducing cost of borrowing because of improved governance. So, to finalize, there is another way. There is an options 3 that we call. That is reforms focused on fiscal, on governance, and structural measures. And we believe by implementing, let's say, a set of these packages, with additional reforms that we recommend, in 10 years, Kenya could reduce its levels of debt to 44%. This is the levels of debt that Kenya had by the mid-2010s, I believe, 2014, 2015. All right. This would also reach the 55% levels of debt to GDP ratio by 2030, but will also have additional effects on jobs and on productivity, and will also create this additional fiscal space that is needed to finance public services like health and education. 4 key takeaways of our public finance review, and I didn't start it with this because I wanted you to stay. Number 1, business as usual risks debt to being unsustainable. Okay? We alluded to this. The cost of defaults are high. All right? They reduce welfare in the economy, are harmful for society. Number 2, austerity measures alone might not be enough to get out of Kenya's fiscal hurdles. No? Structural and government reforms are also needed. And of course, what we have seen is that if Kenya's fiscal performance is associated with this changing economic structure, there is something to do also about the economic structure overall. Number 3, revenue policy, as it was mentioned before too, should focus more on increasing the tax base, on revising exemptions, on making the system more progressive, while also expenditure measures should target raising the efficiency of the budget. And perhaps if this was not clear before, it's hard to raise taxes, of course, when wages are falling. It's hard to raise taxes to companies when the competitiveness of the economy is also falling. And it's hard to do further cuts on the budget if the budget is becoming increasingly rigid. And number 4, we need to look to the budget, but also we need to look beyond the budget. There is another way to do fiscal policy in Kenya, which is, we believe, is by bundling these different revenue measures, bundling the expenditure measures, bundling it with governance and anti-corruption control measures, that fiscal stability, growth, and jobs would be achieved in Kenya. Thank you.
Okay, Cabinet Secretary John Buddy, you have 4 tips and tricks there to solve all your problems. After this, you can go on leave. So, well done to Jorge Tudela as well as Naomi Madenge for walking us through the fundamentals of those 2 key reports. We definitely have a lot to unpack. And I'll be leaning on Dr. Julius Kipngetich, who's our discussant for today, to bring this all together at the end. Now, I welcome Ms. Abha Prasad for the next session, which is the panel discussion. Abha is the World Bank Practice Manager for the Prosperity Global Practice. And is the moderator of our panel here today. Next up is a well-known name to most of us in the governance space, Ms. Sheila Masinde, the Executive Director of Transparency International Kenya. She has 20 years work experience in anti-corruption, governance, project management, media, and outreach. If you can join us up here on the podium, please. Thank you. I also would like to welcome Dr. Julius Kipngetich, Group CEO of Jubilee Insurance. He is a scholar, speaker, and corporate guru. He has served in executive positions in both public and private sector organizations, including as the previous CEO of Kenya Wildlife Service and a former lecturer at this very university. Thank you. Dr. Abraham Muriu, CEO Bajeti Hub. Dr. Rugo previously worked with the Institute of Economic Affairs. He is a contemporary speaker and regularly engages in training and public talks on topics around governance, public finance management, devolution, spiritual, and holistic personal development. He has a PhD and a master's degree in public management from the University of Potsdam, in Germany. And last, no, I have two others. Rose Apunda, she is an economist and a PhD candidate here at the University of Nairobi. If you can join us on the podium. Last but not least is Dr. Owen Nyang'oro. Owen is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi's Department of Economics and Development Studies. He has several years of experience in research, training, and policy analysis. He previously worked as a policy analyst at the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, KIPRA. I think we have a full panel, and with that, I'd like to hand over the mic to Abba.
Yeah. Thank you, Vera, and a very, very warm good morning to all people present here. I want to recognize Honorable PS and our World Bank Group directors, the distinguished guests, development partners, the students, and my dear friends. How do I say? Mazuri Sana, right, Naomi? Mazuri Sana. So it gives me great pleasure to be here today to moderate this very esteemed panel on two of our key flagship reports, the Kenya Economic Update and the Kenya Public Finance Review. And like many of us here, I also started my career in the university, teaching in the University of Delhi, and then also very privileged to be working also in the Georgetown University at DC. But I don't want to spend too much time because I know that we are really short of time, and I have requested all our panelists to keep to the 3 to 4 minutes mark. And we have a gentleman in the audience who sort of signal out to us when you touch the 3-minute mark. That's our friend Hore there, so that we have a little more time for question and answers. So with that, let me turn to you, Rose. From your perspective, what are the risks of high public debt that will affect jobs and Kenyans' economic future? What do you think can be done about it?
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. I think from my perspective, it's better to understand how did we get where we are in terms of debt? How did we arrive to where we are? So some of the factors have been alluded to by the CS, like the issue of mismatch between the revenues and the expenditures, that is terms of bringing out realistic budgets. But also we have seen over time, the Office of the Control of Budget and Auditor General has always been talking about low absorption of development funds. And we know, as per our regulations, we are supposed to borrow for development funds. And development funds only take, the development budget takes 30% of the entire budget. If we have 30% and we absorb less than 10% of the 30%, I think it's now better we ask ourselves, where has our development funds been going to? Then secondly, we can also understand where we've come from by understanding the linkage between the budget planning process and the budget execution. You see, expenditure you can't spend without having the budget first. So does it mean the links that we have, because from Kenya we have the Vision 2030, which is now linked to the medium-term plans all the way up to the annual development plans and the CBROP that we usually do annually. Does it mean how we budget versus how we spend, there is a mismatch? By understanding these critical areas, we'll also be able to know why do we have pending bills and stalled projects. Does it mean the low absorption of the budget funds is what makes us have pending bills? But this one we can answer through the national government perspective, but what about the county governments? Because for them, even if they receive their late disbursements, they will always receive the entire share of the equitable share. It's only the national government that captures the entire deficit. So why do we have both pending bills at the county level, which we can't explain, but we have at the national level? So by that, we can also say maybe there is inefficient use of the debts that we've been taking. Are we taking debts and project them to investments where we are not able to see returns? Because I'm pretty sure if Kenyans are able to see the debts are put into good use, they'll be able to say, yes, we are in this situation, but we can see the projects that these debts were intended to take. So because of that, we have that by having these debts, we have a lot of governance issues and maybe diversion of funds, meaning a lot of funds will be going towards revenue, payment of debts as opposed to service delivery. And remember, majority of the youth are in that category that need these essential services, that is education and the health. So it makes it difficult even at the people at the helm to now balance. Yeah. And then this week's foundation now is leaving us with a lot of debt overhang. It's now high time we also diagnose the root cause of why we are here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you for highlighting the mismatches, and particularly between the pending bills at the county level, debt at the state, federal level, and the fact that you sort of made the segue to my very next question, which is for Dr. Owen. It's about Kenya being at this high risk of debt distress. And as Rose said, like, what reforms are most urgent to achieve long-term fiscal sustainability, and how would they compare to the historical precedents in this country? I mean, what do you think? Is it pragmatic, feasible? How do you talk about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, one of the things that has been happening is that the government has been taking initiatives to reduce the debt overload, especially to remove outside of the debt distress. And one of the major aspects has been fiscal consolidation. But this has not achieved what has been intended, because you are seeing that fiscal deficit is still high at 5.3. It has been going down. So I think one of the most important things that needs to be done within the fiscal consolidation, which will continue, is having a fiscal consolidation plan, which was alluded to by the CS. And within the plan, we should have prioritization of what aspects or what items we need to focus on so that we reduce the fiscal deficit. And secondly, other than that, we have timelines in terms of implementation. So that is one of the things which I think is important. Another one is on debt management. So there is a need for some level of fiscal discipline in terms of how do we manage our debt. One thing we need to focus on is what are the borrowing limits, and are we alluding to them when we're implementing our fiscal strategy? And this especially goes to unbudgeted for expenditures, because that is where we incur most of the debt to support those. And in line with that is also about the expenditure levels. Rose has talked about the recurrent expenditure being higher than expected. That is above the 70% that is provided by the PFM Act, meaning that development expenditure has been low. So we need to have a balance of this. And one area we can focus on is reducing on and plan for expenditures, and expenditures basically like salaries and wages constituting a lot of the expenditure items. Another one is on retirement of short-term debt, which has been going on over time, so that we move to, which are a bit risky, to move to long-term debt. So this has been going on, but we are still at a stage where the cost of debt is still high. So we need to move towards a relatively high-cost debt to relatively lower cost debt. And this also goes with the risk that we incur by holding relatively high-risk debt. Something else which we need to focus on, which I think was presented in the PFM review, is the exemptions and incentives that we offer. Because this can be a way of addressing some of these expenditure items. For instance, the transfers we give to state-owned enterprises, especially the commercial ones. I think this is an area which we need to focus on so that we see how we can reduce this expenditure, as this will reduce the overall expenditure that we have. And then lastly is in revenue management. So we need to enhance our revenue management measures so that we can be able to raise more. And as we expand the tax base, we look at which areas can we be able to optimize so that we get optimal returns on the on what we collect. Thank you.
Let me push you a little more. Like these are really great measures in terms of what you set out for fiscal consolidation, for debt management, reducing cost and risk of debt. But what is the historical precedent? Like,
okay, historically what has been happening is that even though there have been measures toward fiscal consolidation, like austerity measures, for instance, in the 2022-2023, austerity measure led to budget cuts of about 300 billion. That reduced the deficit. But we find situations where even within the period of fiscal consolidation, we have certain expenditures which we still incur, which are not budgeted for. So this brings in a counterintuitive kind of policy in terms of what we need to implement. And other than that, there are also situations where we still need government commits in terms of supporting state-owned enterprises. And these are entities which incur debt. So there may be government guarantees. So these become part of the national government expenditures. So if this can be addressed, I think we can be able to move towards meeting the fiscal target. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Owen. Let me switch gears completely and come to you, Sheila, and ask about how does corruption affect Kenya's fiscal sustainability, particularly on the revenue and the expenditure side? And from your perspective, what reforms could prove most effective to tackle it? And also to push a little bit more, like, what do you think the role civil society should play in monitoring and enforcing this fiscal transparency?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Corruption remains a key concern in the country. I think from the presentation by Jorge on the Public Finance Review, we still see that there's continued concern, and various studies have pointed that we need to deal with corruption. Many Kenyans are finding it a key problem in regard to the high cost of living, inflation, and basically the health of the economy. I think you pointed out to the standing of, or the position of Kenya in the Corruption Perceptions Index. And I think as you were talking about the position, I just reflected that Tanzania is doing better than us. You must have seen the comments in Parliament yesterday in Tanzania, where they said they have better democracy, better brains. I think we can dispute all that. But one thing we may not be able to dispute is that they have time without number done better than us, at least on the CPI in regard to the placement of Kenya in the fight against corruption. We were placed at number at 121, but I think the most important statistic from the CPI is that we scored 32 out of 100. They're university students here. 32 out of 100. Is that a retake or a resit? Huh? Yes. So we are not doing so well in regard to that. And then obviously when you couple it with comments that have come from people in government, the Auditor General, former President, I think, and others, in regard to the amount of money we are losing in a day, though we have pushed for maybe the Auditor General, the EACC, to really quantify the real cost of corruption. Currently, I think from the estimates that have been given, almost 2 billion a day, but we really need to quantify and prove this particular amount that has been given. In the case of illicit financial flows, specifically in regard to corruption, there's estimated almost 40 billion, and in my own thinking, that could actually be an underestimate because we know that illicit financial flows, corruption, all these things, economic crimes are really covert, and so there's much more that we probably aren't capturing that we are losing out there. In regard to dealing with corruption, in regard to particularly on the revenue side of things, I really would echo calls. I think the CS has also said that in his remarks. In regard to revenue collection, how do we actually start automating and digitizing these processes so that we are able to really track the collections? There's been really a growing concern even when you look at the county side, where I think when you look at how counties are performing in terms of revenue collection, where some have drastically gone down over the years, and there's really a concern that we are not doing much in terms of monitoring revenue collection, and there's a lot of losses in that direction. Then there's, of course, the allegations and concerns around corrupted taxation systems. You know, for example, who gains from tax exemption? Right now, the CS was just talking about who's gaining from the decisions around subsidies and how these processes are conducted. Can this information on, for instance, who's gaining from tax exemptions be publicly available? Can the Auditor General start auditing some of these decisions on tax exemptions so that we ensure that there's due process being followed? And can these reports be made public so the public is able to follow them? On expenditure, I would also point to the concerns around the runaway public wage bill. I read the report and I saw the comment around the need to put a freeze on hiring of non-technical positions. I don't know that touches on advisors, because there's been a really, really growing concern on the number of advisors in government. I don't know who saw this yesterday, but there's a WhatsApp chat that was moving along different groups about the number of advisors in the president's government. Sometimes, in the president's office, almost more than 20, some with duplicated roles. I counted my own area. I work in governance and anti-corruption. I saw almost 3 advisors. So sometimes my question on advisors is, when I see the number of advisors in public office, is if I need 10 advisors to advise me, do I have the experience and the competence required to then do that job? Or should I just be at home? Because then there is no point of having 10 advisors, surely. And I think we really need to, and of course, advisors is just the point that Kenyans have pointed, and which were promised last year at the height of the protests, and trying to resolve the issues that they would be halved. I've not seen them being reduced. Instead, I've seen more people being appointed every time there are political negotiations to be made. I'm almost concluding. I think the other thing is on austerity measures when you talk about expenditure. But I think austerity, yes, but we need to really look at where we are putting the austerity measures. It shouldn't compromise health, education, and critical services, as we have seen before. I'll finish in regard to issues around procurement. I think that I'm happy with the talks about the electronic government procurement, the e-procurement processes, but I think we really need to ring-fence those processes from human interference. When you look at IFMIS and other electronic systems and our record in terms of managing these and using this to ensure accountability, there have been concerns in regard to how many downtime periods we've had with this, and how people have ensured that every time there's a downtime, processes are done outside the system, and there are questions around some of those processes that they've really followed the law and the regulations. But procurement reforms must also come with reforms around beneficial ownership, transparency. We need to really have real beneficial ownership, ensuring that there's free and accessible, publicly accessible information on who's owning companies that are being given these procurement contracts, and also tackled with a really tightening of the conflict of interest regime that we're currently using, noting that there's a pending bill on the conflict of interest. I think for me, those are the reforms that I critically look at. And one last one is the issue around wealth declaration and lifestyle audits for public officers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very comprehensive, complete answer. Thank you so very much. And let me sort of come to one of the points that you rose about the e-procurement, and then turn to Dr. Abraham and ask him from his perspective, what does he think are the key weaknesses in Kenya's public financial management system that hinders this effective fiscal consolidation?
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the work that has gone into this. And the conversations. Of course, 3-4 minutes can only do so much. But I want to just summarize my pointers around the PFM system. And I will summarize it under the fact that we say that we have a huge trust deficit. And therefore, I just took the word trust, and I just saw that for remembering. I think one of the first things is the question around transparency without rewards and consequences. In the Kenyan lingo, the transparency with utadu. What will you do now that you know? We have really improved. Right now, if you go to any county, we are at 64% of budget information and comprehensiveness. You go to the National Treasury website, you have literally quite some information. But is that transparency meaning anything? Does it get rewarded? Does it get punished when we know that the Office of the Auditor General has made it clear? World Bank is using a very light language of slippages. I use theft. Because really, we know all that, but transparency must translate into something. And therefore, all the challenges with the IFMIS system, the e-procurement system, we are trying to be more transparent, But will there be a reward, for instance? Is there a reward for the most transparent government official? But is there a consequence also? That's T. The second one is results. And the question is results for who? Budgets, public finance does not exist as an end in itself. It exists to deliver results for children, for women, for senior citizens, for the youth, for all of us as citizens. But the question of results, where there's no connection between the development planning, for instance, if you read the Vision 2030, you read the Medium Term Plan 4, you read the BETA, depending on how you pronounce it, BETA, plan, you read the various documents, you ask, which results are we actually pursuing? Because that's a big question, because then it connects to the consolidation plan. Right now, we are pursuing a revenue consolidation program. It is not working. I think we actually should be pursuing an expenditure consolidation program. And that does not necessarily mean cutting costs. It means spending every shilling for what it's supposed to be. And therefore, that connection, which has been a challenge, connecting between what is being done, and if I was to go into public finance, the program-based budgets, we rarely see reporting that lines up the targets we set in the program-based budget against how much we have spent. And that's why I'm asking the question of results for what. Thirdly, is uncoordinated policies and an uncertain regulatory environment. I think that's a big, big challenge, and that has been highlighted, and that is affecting our competitiveness. And here I bring in the question of devolution. Right now, I would dare ask each of you, who is doing what in healthcare, for instance? Who is doing what in water provision? We have county governments are responsible for water provision. They are budgeting for it. The national government has some aspects of water, including the PPPs around it. Then you have the water companies, many of which are the most riddled with debt. Who is doing what? Because that is critical, because with that, then what happens is that you have all this duplication of roles. You have spending. You are spending the same amount of money in the national level, 136 billion for healthcare, and almost a similar amount at the county level. Yet counties are responsible for 90% of your health facilities. S, sustainability thinking. And here, I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now is that we have vendor-driven spending and not service delivery spending. A lot of things are determined by the vendor. Think about the SHA system. Think about the e-citizen system. We are discussing about vendors. We are thinking about the tendercrats. This seems to be the one. And I think that's a big challenge, because that is why a lot of spending is happening sometimes outside the system. That is why we have pending bills. And when you scrutinize the pending bills, we have concerns that some of the times even pending bills that get approved are those that are politically connected. And the ones that are not politically connected, then you also have to wait. Finally, and this for me is the most critical, is a T, which I think is the question of theft of public resources. We are using different words, corruption, slippage, what. The Auditor General, once funds cannot be accounted for, there is an officer who is responsible for accounting for those funds. They are, and funds cannot be lost. Funds are not a pin. They are within a system. Funds cannot be lost. We know who was paid. And if the service was not provided, then there is a theft going on. And that theft is against the people of Kenya. And for me, I think that's critical as I close this, because we are saying we cannot continue with business as usual. Part of that business as usual is where resources are not accounted for, the Auditor General investigates and provides a report, but no action is taken. So for me, I think those are the weaknesses, and the reverse of that is actually what needs to be done to sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think you raised really very, very important issues, and I mean, some very provocative things regarding thefts and slippages, and I liked your term of use of expenditure consolidation rather than what we say rationalization or cutbacks. So let me take that point and quickly ask Dr. Owen, because I've been given this as the last question in terms of time before we turn to Dr. Julius and then to the audience. So taking that point on expenditure, how do you think Kenya can balance the need to increase expenditure for social services and jobs along with this need of fiscal consolidation in this high debt environment? I mean, I think this is the
okay, thank
question.
I think one of the things we need to do is do better targeting so that we know where expenditure is going to. Social services are very important, so we cannot do away with them. In as much as we're trying to address expenditure issues, we need to support health, education, and also the normal social protection, including the old age, which is the forgotten group. Because if you look at the statistics, based on Fin Access survey, only about 11% of old people access pension. So this is a concern, because it means you work and then you get poor the moment you retire. So these are areas where we need targeted transfers. And one of the things that can be done is to move away from contributory schemes, especially for the low-wage and the informal sector, and find a way such that we can have support for this kind of, this group of population. Within the consolidation framework, there are a bit of savings, especially if you reduce the recurrent expenditure, there's savings. So this savings is what can be used to support some of these expenditures. We know the expenditure on education is high and health, but these are basic services that must be offered. So we cannot run away from them. One of the things that can also be done is to look at the savings coming from public finance management strengthening. Because if you do this, there have been mentions of procurement process, public-private partnerships, and the rest. So better management of these services will release some funds which can be able to support social programs, even with the need for consolidation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Owen. May I please turn to Dr. Julius for giving us a little bit of a rapporteur of this panel and anything he'd like to say. But again, we are really short of time, so request his sharp remarks for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it has been a nice day. We are listening to our own data. So thank you, World Bank, for fleshing the data for us. And I think this is a signaling. It is a mirror for us to look at ourselves and say, are we doing the right things? And so therefore, collectively, we as Kenyans have to own our own data and then say, what can we do about it? I like the new language that's emerging from government. The minister used them and said, we want to be radical and bold. Okay, that's unusual for Kenya government officers. But we must breathe life to that language. And we must see it in the execution then. And what we need to see then is how ambitious and aggressive are they in executing what we are telling them. Okay? And it's not just policymakers, it is we collectively as a nation. And so there's a country we normally admire most, which is Singapore. And Singapore used a change theory concept called creative destruction, which is how do we undo the old and bring the new without going through a violent process. That's what creative destruction is. And this messaging today that we have heard from the World Bank is we need to do creative destruction of Kenya, which is how do we then dismantle our old ways of doing things and do things differently going forward. Because growing the economy, if you look at the projection for the next 5 years, we'll be growing at an average rate of 5%. That average rate of 5% is not sufficient to address the problems that we are currently facing. We actually need to be growing at roughly between 7 to 10% for us to then deal a decisive blow to the challenges that this report presents. So therefore, we need to breathe life actually to the 2010 Constitution. Currently, we have not given it life because then we superimpose all culture on a new constitution. And so therefore, it created a business as usual approach. And so we need to radically then change. But I have 4 issues that then I summarize as the war cry for the nation. Because if we don't do that war cry, we will be sitting here year in, year out, and lamenting, just like we have lamented for the last 60 years. So number 1 is we must expand the economy. When we talk about taxing, what's a tax? A tax is a levy on production. But production must happen at a faster rate, productivity, and in bigger quantities. So for us to be able to tax. Our strategic posture currently does not indicate a willingness to expand the economy. And let's be practical. You know, sometimes we can sit here and talk about big things in aggregate, but we must break those big things to where the rubber meets the road. For example, Kenya has a very nice climate, the macroeconomics are not too bad. If I want to invest in the city of Nairobi, what do I need to do? I go to City Hall. Who is there? Who is the investment officer in City Hall to receive me? Let's be practical. Nobody. If I need land, I need to go online and say, these are the available lands in Nairobi, and I can click and I say, this one, and Minister of Land should be able to give me a title if I demonstrate that I want to invest. It doesn't happen. Now we have added the cost of investing in Kenya, because then I have to get a lawyer to verify that the title is genuine. And even that verification is doubtful. Because some lands have double or triple titles. So let's be practical. So we must expand the economy very, very fast. We must grow at 7% plus consistently for the next 20 years. The Chinese have done it. They did it since 1984. Look at the output. They removed, over that period, 800 million people out of poverty. That is what we need to do, the war cry. So, radical, bold policy, but requires ambitious, aggressive execution. Number 2, strengthening institutions. Now, our institutions are at various stages of being knocked off. Now, the guy who won the Nobel Prize last year for economics was awarded because of institutions. The guy who wrote Why Nations Fail. So we need to then ask ourselves, are our institutions strong? Can we trust their decisions? Are their policies predictable? Are their decisions consistent? If the institutions work, investors will come. Okay? Why do people invest in Rwanda? It's consistency. They know Kagame is there and he's consistent. No jokes. So I go and, so you can see there was a letter doing the rounds. I'm not sure whether it's genuine. Them asking the UN's family, why don't you cross over from Kenya to Kigali? I'm sure most of you saw it. So we need to strengthen institutions and make them support the economy as is required by law. It's there in law, but it's the people who are not. So what do we need to do? So strengthen institutions to deliver their mandate. Number 3 is this issue of debt distress. Now that we have consumed, remember tumekula pesa. We have consumed it and we must repay. Now, the capacity of the economy to repay is difficult. You have seen the data. The World Bank has told you on your face, your interest rates, the interest rates you pay is abnormal. You saw the red lines. Yeah? So if the interest rates are abnormal, it means therefore the economy must grow faster to be able to repay. So if you look at this year, the budget outlook paper, It is talking about, I think, repayment of 1.6 trillion against a collection of 2.7. The projected collection is 2.7 trillion. So if you calculate that ratio, it's around 60%. So 60% of your tax collection goes to interest repayment in one financial year. Now you guys are looking for help loans. Where will it come from? So we are actually in a corner, and we must wriggle out of it, okay? And the only way you can wriggle out of it is if the economy expands faster, so that then we can tax it, okay? Otherwise, what we are now doing, just kicking the can down the road. So we need to really deal with this issue. The minister said this year is going to, domestic borrowing is almost 600 billion. Now, SMEs will be competing with government for credit. It is not possible. So you'll be crowded out, and so therefore our capacity to get domestic investments is impaired. And then finally, good governance, number 4. We must then now address that question of good governance, and we must listen to what people like Sheila Masinde says. We must listen to her. And we must get out of this number 121 or below in the TIA index.
I think we need to wrap up.
Yeah. One minute. So we must then address that question of good governance in the country at a war cry level. Not just we wish, but we must have a decisive blow to corruption. And there must be demonstrated effort. So you has used the word radical and bold. Let's see. Let's see what happens in a decisive blow to corruption. But finally, is culture change. To do all these things, we need a new Kenya. It has to be a completely different culture at government, but also at citizen level. All of us collectively must change. We gave ourselves a new constitution in 2010, but we assume somebody else will breathe life to it. We must, okay, change that. So I'll refer you back to our national anthem, and I'll just pick a few words from it, which is, Kenya istahili heshima. See what you sing every day? So can we be true to it and say, Kenya deserves respect. Let's roll our sleeves and make it work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Julius, and for giving that very clear clarion call to this very young audience where the future of the country lies. So we have very little time. I think perhaps we can take a quick round of around 2 or 3 questions. And I ask if you have questions, please raise your hands, and Vera will kindly help me out with this. There are microphones in the room. If you wish, come towards the person with the microphones. Introduce yourself and be very brief, please.
Yeah, okay. Ongoro Thomas from the Department of Economics and Development Studies, University of Nairobi. Yeah? Oh, I start. Okay, my name is Ongoro Thomas, Department of Economics and Development Studies. The first question, how do you assess the sustainability of a fiscal program? In other words, which empirical tests you have to carry out to determine the sustainability of the fiscal program. Number 2, I would like you to mention the limitations of the theories of the fiscal deficits in Kenya. Number 3, you are talking about inflation of 5%. I'm finishing. You are talking about inflation of 5%. Okay, are you talking about headline inflation? Are you talking about the core inflation? What about the targeted inflation? What about the expected inflation? And how is this expected inflation affecting the interest rates in the country? And finally, what is the potential growth? What is the potential growth? The professor was talking about we need to increase growth from 7 to 10%. But what is the potential growth of Kenya here? What's the potential output? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think he took the questions which others could have answered. So should we, given in the interest of time, I would just ask.
I have a question.
There's a lady. Okay, that's going to be the last question.
Yes.
So go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Agnes Njiru, the director of Safari Tour Adventures Limited. We do both inbound and outbound tours. So between 2023 and 2024, we've had an increase of 19.8% in GDP in the country. So my question goes to Prasad. What is World Bank doing to increase domestic tourism in the country? Because it is very key. I would like you to at least talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So may I request the panel, may I request Dr. Owen, Dr. Abraham to answer the question on the sustainability, the theories of fiscal deficit, inflation issues, and perhaps if any other person from the panel could like to chip in. On tourism, is there anybody from the World Bank? We have people from the private sector, if they would like to come in, or if Mary would like to add anything on her question on tourism. She wanted to know what the World Bank explicitly is doing to support tourism, and maybe in your closing remarks you could pull that through. So over to you, the kind request to be as brief as you've always been. And I thank you for your briefness till now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me answer the first question in terms of testing sustainability. I think there are standard procedures and processes of testing sustainability based on the work of World Bank and IMF. For instance, we have debt sustainability analysis, which is done across country. And this depends whether you're looking at a developing country or a developed country. So these are there in the literature, so I don't think I have to belabor in terms of actual empirical testing. And they look at indicators like debt to GDP ratio, debt to exports, and the rest. Limitations of theories of fiscal deficit. Okay. I think one of the things we have to note is that each of the theories we talk about has certain assumptions that we underline. And I'll just give one of the things that we need to look at when looking at fiscal deficit. It assumes that the country will be operating at a given level for over some time, so that when you're calculating fiscal deficit, the assumptions support your projections in terms of what you expect. That means we're looking at the growth of the economy, the level of absorption in the economy, and the rest. So that's basically what I can give Teddy in that for now.
I think let me just add one thing. In our case of Kenya, I think the discussion has been, how do we arrive at the GDP number? And I would like to challenge you students. When you use all the figures here, you notice you're dancing between a figure of 16.2 trillion and 19.2 trillion, depending on which ratio you're using. That affects a lot of the ratios we talk about. Because you see, when you have a bigger GDP number, what it suggests is that you also have a huge revenue potential. You also have space for borrowing. And I hold the view that part of our fiscal distress, part of our debt distress situation is that we over-approximated our GDP value and try to look like we are still within the measures, continued borrowing, because the GDP growth and the revenue growth don't seem to match. That's all I would say for now.
Thank you so much, and I cannot resist not answering him on the tools on debt sustainability. So basically, as somebody here very rightly put, I think it was Dr. Julius, once you borrow, you got to repay. And when you repay your external debt, that's repaid by your export earnings. When you pay your domestic debt, you pay in local currency, which is your revenues that you earn. So you have indicators on liquidity, which is your debt service payments, as a ratio of your revenues or as a ratio of exports. And as what Abraham just said, then you also look at solvency, which is your debt to GDP, and what Dr. Julius said, that's why you've got to expand the GDP. So I really want to thank everyone for this very, I should say, stimulated and exciting panel, and also for the clarion call for the good things for Kenya to come forward, for the future of Kenya, and that is really you. So thank you very much, and over to Vera. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to our esteemed panel. Thank you for making the time and for the stimulating insights. We really appreciate you. So our hashtag is still... Okay. Our hashtag is still Kenya Economic Update, as well as hashtag Kenya Public Finance Review. We are slowly creeping to the end of our program, and saving the best for last. Please join me in welcoming Mary Potter-Peshka, Regional Director for the World Bank Group's International Finance Corporation, to deliver the closing remarks. Can we give her a round of applause?
That's a lot of pressure that Vera puts me under. I know you're all probably hungry by now, or at least need another coffee, and I don't want to stand between you and lunch. I'm not going to stand on any protocols as we're out of time. But I do want to thank you all for joining us and for the engaging dialogue and the good questions. I was going to offer to forfeit my closing slot because I was getting excited by the questions. But let me just wrap us up by sharing a few reflections, mostly focused on opportunities. And I don't think you'll be surprised by what I choose to focus on, given that I'm from the World Bank Group's private sector arm. So first, I really want to emphasize the importance of boosting economic growth to support fiscal policy. For this, an improved investment climate and business environment is essential, and the report highlights several areas that would empower the private sector to invest, drive innovation, create jobs, boost productivity, and importantly for the discussion today, boost accompanying tax revenues. I heard a great analogy just yesterday when the World Bank's new VP, who's soon to be based here in Nairobi full-time, described that fiscal management can be thought of as 4 tires on a car. You have the expenditure tire, tax administration, debt management, and economic growth. And if you can boost economic growth, it makes it a lot easier to get those other 3 wheels rolling and keeping them rolling. The second point I want to raise is the importance of public-private collaboration and the potential it has to contribute to Kenya's development goals. Public-private partnerships, I know there's skeptics in the rooms, or PPPs, for example, they're not a panacea, but they are a tool that can help address infrastructure needs and support development. Strengthening processes and frameworks, though, have to happen to help PPPs be effective and contribute meaningfully to Kenya's economic progress. Third, there's the African Continental Free Trade Area that represents potentially a transformative opportunity for the country. It offers the chance to expand trade, attract investment, and create jobs. By leveraging this platform, we can support agro-industrialization, boost services like air transport and digital trade, and position Kenya as even stronger regional leader in economic growth and innovation. And then finally, I think Kenya has the opportunity to lead in climate-resilient growth and green manufacturing. By investing in climate finance, sustainable procurement, and green production, we can create new industries, attract investment, and ensure long-term sustainability while addressing global challenges like climate change. Tourism, I didn't have in my list, but tourism is something that IFC is engaged in extensively across the continent, including here in Kenya, both through technical assistance and through direct investment. In fact, we're invested in a number of hotels, both business hotels, but also more safari hotels. And on a more personal level, I've contributed a lot of my own money to visiting Amboseli and Masai Mara and Lamu, and I'm open for ideas on where else I should be spending my money. But we really do see tourism as a way to contribute to direct jobs, but also indirect jobs through backward linkages. So something we'll very much continue to do here in Kenya. So I think final point is none of us can avail ourselves of any of the opportunities I mentioned alone. By working together, private sector, government, development partners, civil society, we can contribute to growing a stronger, more inclusive economy that creates jobs, fosters innovation, and improves livelihood for all Kenyans. So I think I've overstayed my welcome. I do want to close by thanking the University of Nairobi, the esteemed speakers and panelists, of course, our VIP guests, the CS and the PS, who I think have run off. It takes a village, as they say, and this is the beginning of the conversation, and I look forward to continuing it. With that, I wish you all a good day.
Thank you very much, Mary. We've come to the end of our event today. Thank you all very much for making the time to join us. Before you leave, a quick reminder, you've been all patient and we have to reward you. So breakfast is served on the 5th floor, just one floor down. Just make sure I don't beat you to it because I'm known for eating a lot of food for my small size. But please remember to follow us and continue the conversation at World Bank Kenya. That's our Twitter handle, at World Bank Kenya. Have a great day, everyone.